Great. So welcome everyone to today's webinar with the New England PTTC. We're very happy to have Dr. Nicole Kosenki here to share about the invitation to change approach. I have a couple quick notes before we get started. Just sharing our funding information for the New England PTTC. We are a program funded through SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Just as a general reminder, the opinions expressed in the webinar are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services and SAMHSA. So no official support or endorsement intended through this webinar. Just a couple notes on the New England Prevention Technology Transfer Center. As I mentioned, we are part of the National PTTC network, which is funded by SAMHSA to provide training and technical assistance for the substance use disorder prevention workforce. So we do a lot of different types of trainings, including webinars like this one, more intensive TA services, resource development, in-person trainings when we can, and a lot of other resources. So if you haven't been to our website yet, I'd encourage you to check that out. We are also one of 10 regional centers and 2 national focus area centers. So if you go to pttcnetwork.org, you'll also find resources from our other partner sites around the country. And then lastly, I just wanted to share the PTTC network uses affirming language to promote the application of evidence-based and culturally informed practices. Words have power, language matters. So we invite you to reflect on this and try to incorporate it into your work as well. And before I hand it over to Dr. Kosenki, I also wanted to let you know at the end of the webinar, we will also have a couple of survey links that I'll share in the chat, and you'll get those via email. So I just wanted to let you know now that those will be coming, and it's really helpful to us if you can share your thoughts through those surveys. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Kosenki for our webinar.
Thanks so much, Kristen. I'm really happy to be here and talk about the invitation to change, which I feel really committed to and excited to share always. So we have a lot to cover in a short period of time. So I'm going to get right to it and share my screen. Okay, so let's get the slideshow. So I am going to do my best to pay attention to the chat as well. And Kristen, if you can help me on that front, that would be good. Just pause me if there's some big red flag that I need to attend to. Happy to do that. But so cool to see people from all over the place, even snowy places. That's exciting. I'm ready. Okay, so the invitation to change approach is what we're discussing today. And I don't think I need to tell you the reason why this model is developed and we're having these discussions, which is that substance use is pretty devastating, and many people, the vast majority of people, struggling with these issues, and in addition to their families, are not getting help. The services are pretty poor, often not evidence-based. There's a lot of suffering, and families are not given tools for what they can do. And there are some things that they can do. In fact, they're often told that they can do nothing. And so we really want to empower family members to have an awareness of the things that they can do, what's under their control to do, and to have some hope about what can be done to influence change and create conditions for change. So family influence is really the most commonly cited reason for treatment entry for substance using folks, and that gives you an idea of why it might be helpful to put some tools into the hands of family members who are also struggling with a lot of stigma, feeling responsible, feeling looped into the stigma that their loved ones are already experiencing. So we have a mission to get effective and accessible evidence-based strategies to family members and loved ones in general of those struggling with substance use. It's really clear that having a sense of community is super important and is a salve in and of itself. It creates a sense of not being alone, of depersonalizing these issues, and changing the conversation in general within a sense of community can be quite powerful to sort of shift into a lens of compassion and engagement. So we have hope about the ways in which family members can help, and we hope to convey that to other people, including the compassion for how difficult and painful it can be for family members. So we're going to jump in with this idea, which is that we're not in control of other people's movement. We can't cause them to change or grow, but we can control the things under our influence to create a climate in which that growth takes place. And those things are quite meaningful, though there's no magic bullet. We're going to talk about a bunch of different pieces that can be utilized to influence those conditions of change. It's hard, though. It's hard to pause when you're feeling scared. It's hard to not have all the exact right answers, because we're going to talk about how black and white thinking is problematic and does not reflect the complexity of these kinds of problems. So, black and white is kind of simpler and more comfortable, whereas complexity requires sitting with the not knowing and not being sure, being uncomfortable at times, practicing learning new things. And everybody here knows how to communicate. I bet does it really well in a lot of circumstances. And yet communicating when you're feeling upset, communicating with someone that you're scared about what they're doing to themselves or to you is really hard. It's really, really hard. I do these trainings all the time, and as soon as I start talking about communication, I hear myself saying the wrong thing and phrasing things in a way that's not ideal. It's super hard to change things that you're used to doing all the time, especially. But in general, trying new things is tough. So that's a bit of a parallel with people struggling with substance use disorders, in that they are trying to do a lot of new things. And so we're asking family members to try new things as well, which is hard and requires a little bit of oomph and requires some valuing and compassion for oneself. And when you're busy attending to all the fires in your family and the really big problems that need attention, it is hard to turn the attention inward and towards other siblings, family members, etc., to really show compassion and attention, positive regard towards oneself. So it's a bit of a shift to think about things in a couple of different ways. But this helping model is something that we've been training professionals in and parents directly, mostly parents, but also partners and other family members, grandparents. And really, it's based on the bones of these three evidence-based therapeutic models of CRAFT, MI, and ACT. If you don't know about these models, there's a lot of good research behind them, a lot of empirical support, a lot of things to read if you're so inclined. So I encourage you to look those up if you're interested in sort of the history and the background of how it is that we pulled together all of these different strategies which was really based on choosing the things that were most influential in creating a climate of change. So we have these 3 different sections within the Invitation to Change model: helping with understanding, helping with awareness, and helping with action. In the middle, we've got the idea of practice, which is something we reiterate throughout the model because as any good behavioral therapist knows, you can't just talk about the ideas and have insight about it. You have to practice new behaviors and flexing those muscles, whether it's about communication or about how you think about something, what your understanding of a thing is, or a problem or a person. If you're trying to make those shifts, then really flexing the muscle of that shift and the new behavior, or the new thought pattern, or the new lens is what's going to solidify it into your day-to-day life and make it feel easier to you. So the helping with awareness is around self-compassion and understanding the role that you as a family member play in this situation. Like, what is under your control to do? What are the buttons you have that are important to know about? How can you increase and maintain your resilience during a difficult situation like substance use disorders in the family? It really is a marathon, not a sprint. So coming at it from this perspective of like, there's a fire, I'm going to put all my needs on the back burner until this fire is out, is really not a strategy that's going to work in the long term. So it requires a bit of a shift of perspective. And of course, we're going to talk about behaviors and responses and communication as well, which is the whole action section. Okay. So we start with behaviors make sense, which is part of the helping with understanding section, and we'll move through these 3 different modules and talk about each one of them one at a time. This is a great proverb which really highlights part of the shift in perspective. They speak of my drinking, but never of my thirst. So when people are doing scary things like using substances, drinking, etc., the behaviors themselves can be a big focus, understandably and validly so. But if that's all we're looking at, then we're losing a lot of information. There's a why behind the behavior. What is happening that is leading to these behaviors, whether it's drinking or drug use? And that will help you join or align yourself with your loved one or with the person using, so that you can have a conversation in which they feel heard and you're more likely to get your thoughts across as well. So if substances were like touching a hot stove, well, they would stop pretty quickly, right? They might do it once, do it twice, but that would be the end of that. Too many downsides, no upsides. But behavior, even when it has downsides, is motivated by reinforcement if it's going to get repeated. So habits happen when there's some amount of reinforcement present, when there's some reward that one feels from the behavior, and that's why we repeat them. So kind of backing away from all of the ideas that we have been taught about substance use disorder or addiction, you kind of have to think about the broader picture here, which is that why did someone repeat a behavior? Well, they're getting something out of it. And that's a really important place to start, because there's a lot of stigma around substance use that kind of hides this one feature that is quite important. So if I told you that I could help you with any of these things, maybe just one of them, maybe all of them, mellow you out, help you feel less depressed, feel good, take away the boredom, cut your anxiety, make you feel funny, make you be funny, help you appreciate others. Look, pretty good things. If I told you I had something that would help you with that, you would probably be interested to know what it is, right? But here's the thing, is that substance use are answers to all of those questions, all of those desires, all of those wishes. So these are the reasons that make sense. So when we talk about behaviors making sense, that concept of behaviors make sense, we're really talking about figure out what the meaning is and what the intention or hope is around the substance use. We know that substance use can do all of these things. It might not do it forever, and it might suddenly do the opposite thing if there's too much or for too long or what have you, but it does do these things. So really accepting that kind of radical acceptance, as DBT would say, of the fact that these substances do help in these ways allows you to sort of align and understand that these behaviors do make some kind of sense. They may not make sense in terms of the long run, but in the immediate, there's sense that is made there. So I'm going to play a bit of a video to illustrate this concept. I'm hoping that I did everything right so you can hear it, but let me know, raise your hand or something if I did not.
Imagine this scenario. You're walking down the side of a two-way street when you look up and see a person trying to cross. There's plenty of traffic and you can hear cars and trucks whooshing by. The person you noticed looks impatient, upset, frantic, and does not seem to be considering the danger ahead of them. Instead, all they seem to be concerned about is getting to the other side of the street. Take a moment to consider the following. What are your thoughts and feelings about this person and their behavior? And what are some actions that those thoughts and feelings make you want to take? You may be thinking, what's wrong with them? What's making them crazy enough to try and cross traffic without thinking? Are they dangerous? You may be feeling scared for what's about to happen, anxious for the person you're watching, and confused by their behavior. Some actions you may want to consider include moving away from the situation by leaving so you don't have to see the person get hurt, or engaging in the situation by yelling at them to stop to try to promote a positive outcome. Continue imagining the same scenario, only now I'll give you a little bit more information. Before you saw this person, they had been driving further down the road with their dog in the back seat. At a stoplight, the dog jumped out of the car and began running through traffic. The person is now frantically trying to get the dog back inside of the car before it gets hurt. Now take a moment to consider the following. What are your thoughts and feelings about this person after learning about their reason for trying to cross such a busy street? What are some actions those thoughts and feelings make you want to take? You might be thinking, how can I help this person? How do I keep him safe when he's upset and not thinking about his own safety? You might be feeling compassion, sadness for the person's situation, and fear it might go badly. You may be more inclined to take action by offering to help, calling for more help, or trying to intervene in some way. The purpose of this exercise is to show that when another person's behavior seems irrational or erratic or scary in some way, in the way that substance use often does, it can push us into a let me get away from this or make it stop response, and make us want to move away from it entirely. It can be hard to see how to be helpful in these situations or to even want to help, while also experiencing our own set of thoughts and emotions as a bystander. By taking a moment to put the behaviors into a larger context, by understanding the why behind their behavior, we can start to make sense of the motivation behind them. We can then decide on a productive way to move forward. So let's think back to the scenario we just imagined. If we start off deciding that the person running in the road is doing it just because they're crazy, then we are also limiting ourselves from seeing the full picture. This way of thinking is natural, but does not facilitate positive action on our part. Instead, if we decide that the person trying to cross the road has a valid or a sympathetic reason for their behavior, we open ourselves up to more understanding. We can now accept new information and learn that the person is trying to find their dog. This information will most likely shift our thoughts and emotions surrounding the behavior, and we'll then be able to come up with and want to come up with a productive plan on how to help them. Finally, let's put this all in the context of substance use. If we decide that a person who is using substances is doing so just because they are an addict, aka a morally bankrupt, irresponsible person, we will very effectively shut out information that could help us understand their behaviors. And without that understanding, we won't be able to find a constructive way to offer support. However, if we open ourselves up to understanding that all behaviors make sense, we will learn that people use substances for valid reasons. Examples could include using substances to ease anxiety, feel more ready to handle daily life, or get to sleep despite physical pain. This type of information will then help us begin moving forward by supporting our loved ones in a productive way.
Okay. So if we had more time, I would ask you all what you thought about that, but feel free to share in the chat if you had any thoughts or comments about that video and this concept in general of how behaviors make sense. This is part of community building and feeling not so alone or in your own silo when we share our thoughts with each other. So I welcome that. So how does it help us to understand what our loved one is going through or what a substance using person is going through? It helps to not take the behavior as personally. A lot of times in families, it can start to feel like, why is she doing this to me? Why is he, why doesn't he understand how much this is hurting the family? And those are understandable thoughts and feelings. But when you step back and take it less personally, you can look at the reason behind it, which doesn't have to do with the family, doesn't have to do with the relationship. And that makes for a much more constructive positioning around communication and also towards behavior plans. How are you going to respond? When you have more empathy for the behavior and the person, you're more likely to step towards them instead of stepping away, which is very hard to influence when you're stepping away, although we'll talk about the value of that in some circumstances. And it increases collaboration, which is really a virtuous positive cycle, so that you have more collaboration, you have more understanding, empathy, and then there's more buy-in for the person using substances who feel like you understand their position and more likely to be willing to accept help and participate with you. This idea of helping the behavior be seen as less random and more predictable is really helpful. A lot of times families feel like this is chaotic, you never know what's going to happen from one day to the next, which can have some truth to it. But oftentimes when loved ones are thinking through what does make sense about their loved one's behavior, then they are more likely to be able to predict and sort of understand the reasoning in a way that helps them feel less anxious, helps them feel more able to strategize about ways to encourage what we call positive opposite behaviors that influence that are a response to the reason that they might want to be using. So instead of smoking pot to relax, maybe exercise or taking a walk or playing tennis together or doing mindfulness or taking a hot shower. That would be a positive opposite behavior. And that strategy is only discovered when we really understand what it is that makes sense about their behavior. So it is really important that someone feel validated as a whole human, even when they're using substances that feel very dramatic and feel like they take up the whole page of understanding who they are. really that is not who they are. Those behaviors are part of who they are. And the more that we focus only on that part, the more they feel like that's all they are, and lose sight of the broader view of their humanity and the other ways in which they have engaged in life in the past or might be able to in the future. We do want people to stay above ground in terms of these behaviors so that we can have conversations, so that we can maintain relationships. And the benefits of considering a change in their behavior is more visible to them if they are, in fact, able to see themselves as a whole person that could engage in relationships in healthier ways as well. So, moving on, we're thinking about how is it that we might think about things a little bit differently in this concept in general of helping with understanding. And one of these ideas is that one size really does not fit all. A path is a prior interpretation of the best way to traverse a landscape. So that's one path. So what other paths might there be? And can we acknowledge the complex nature of these problems? People enter into and leave substance use for many, many reasons, more reinforcement kinds of reasons, and different strategies really do work for different people. Support is much more powerful if individual circumstances are recognized and acknowledged and paid attention to. So cookie cutter kinds of responses feel like they really missed the boat and are much less likely to be followed through on. And remember that everybody likes options. If you're told one way or the highway, it's much harder to decrease your defensiveness and engage with a plan like that. Whereas if you think there are a couple of options and you get some choice in the matter, then you're more likely to buy into the plan. So how does it help to think of this idea that one size doesn't fit all? Well, it provides hope in knowing that there's different ways to help. So if you've tried one thing and it hasn't been successful or had the impact you want, there are other things to consider. All families don't have to do one thing. Helping can really be in alignment with their values and what they know about their loved one, what they know about their particular family, and what they know about the history of how things have worked in the past. It increases the flexibility of how families can help and allows for some choices that we can increase collaboration with. Our dilemma is that we hate change and love it at the same time. What we really want is for things to remain the same, but get better. How true is that? So ambivalence is really normal. That's another part of this perspective of helping with understanding that we really need to think of ambivalence as an expected part of this process of change. There are reasons why the original behavior made sense, and those reasons haven't gone anywhere. So being ambivalent about your process of change is really to be expected. If you anticipate ambivalence or you encounter it with a shock and horror as if the world is ending and that all hope is lost, you're back at the beginning, then you're going to be in for a very bumpy ride. Whereas if you anticipate ambivalence as a normal part of a change process, which it most certainly is, anybody who's been through any big change recognizes you slide back, you're not sure, then you go forward, well, not so sure, go back forward again. So that ambivalence is to be expected because those old reasons still exist. Ambivalence can be seen in a person's behavior and in their language. So they might be saying something that indicates to you, well, I thought I was going to go to that therapist, but now I'm not so sure it fits with my schedule, or didn't really like her, or whatever it is. That might show up in their behavior. And if you say, what? I and throw a big fit, as you might feel like doing, then their response might be to dig in, right? So our response to ambivalence can be quite influential on whether that ambivalence sticks around, digs into a defensive position, or remains open to the continued change process. You might have one of these common reactions of wanting to make it go away, or wanting to get through to them, confront the denial, lecture, etc. And all of those responses are quite understandable, but they do have the impact of people kind of digging in. So this pizza is an illustration of one way to think about it. So if you sort of separate out the pizza into half being, okay, this is why I do want to change, and the other half being, this is why I do not want to change, then this ambivalence pie can sort of illustrate that if I go to you and I say, well, I'm going to talk to you only about the reasons that you ought to change, then I've taken up that whole part of the pie, and all that's left is for you to talk about the reasons not to change. So when we think about it that way, it really illustrates that my conversation with you is going to influence what you feel like is being left out and what there is left to talk about in the entirety of the pie that we're talking about with ambivalence. So this is helpful to think through with family members. If you're working with family members, to notice when it is that they're really leaning into one side of the pie, and does that have an influence on how their loved one is responding. So how does it help us to think about ambivalence as normal? Well, it does normalize the process of change as a back and forth between reasons for change and reasons for not changing, and it's not a sign of failure. It allows families to empathize with their loved one and the difficulties with changing. And it helps families reframe the experience of seeing and hearing reasons for not making change as being stuck rather than being in denial. This rationale for learning communication strategies that can be more helpful is also important, because there are different ways to think about responding to ambivalence when we get to this action section. So now we've gone through the helping with understanding. We're moving over to helping with awareness with these three concepts of self-awareness, willingness, and self-compassion. So I'm going to play a little video again to illustrate this notion of self-compassion and noticing stress. Okay, once again, I encourage you to take notes in the chat, make notes in the chat about what you think about that and what it brings to mind. I don't know about you, but when it gets to the end there and it says, let go, it's important to let go of your stresses, I always have a little bit of like an irritated response, like, the hell do you do that? That is feels pretty simplistic. But the notion here is not so much that it's easy to do, but that it's important to recognize that when you are holding on to stress and anxiety and difficulty, then you have an accumulation physiologically and emotionally of this accumulation of impact on your being. And taking breaks, whether that means allowing yourself to laugh at jokes, allowing yourself to go to work or see a friend or not think about the problem for a while, actually re-energizes you and gives you more resilience and buoyancy in the face of the stress that you need to pick up again later. As my awareness increases, my control over my own being increases. So that awareness is really about choice, about moving forward in ways, chosen paths, rather than feeling sort of reactive and bouncing around from one thing to the next. So we start with self-awareness, noticing the feelings, the thoughts, physical reactions and actions you experience related to this struggle. Lots of understandable feelings can come up: fear, anger, confusion, upset, thoughts of disbelief, failure, remorse. There might be a lot of physiological symptoms: tension, pain, exhaustion, but still not able to rest. Reactions like overcompensating, shutting down, pulling away. These are all really understandable reactions, and they're part of the body's way of trying to deal with stress. And it's not something to notice and therefore panic. It's about noticing those feelings and thereby giving yourself an opportunity to manage them in a sort of intentional way, right? So if I notice, clients will often say, what is noticing my stress going to help me with? Like, that just, mindfulness just makes me more aware of the terrible feelings and thoughts I have. The problem is that without really honestly acknowledging those thoughts and feelings, you're really not able to effectively deal with them, as we know. So staying connected to your loved one while they're struggling with substances is hard. It's painful. We have to acknowledge that that's painful. And that stress that you're accumulating in staying connected is important to acknowledge. It's like looking at your gas tank and before you go on a long trip, noticing how much gas you have left in the tank. You don't want to be left in the middle of the country or in the middle of the highway running out of gas. You want to do it in a planful and intentional way. Navigating these difficulties is like that. Notice where the gas tank is at and figure out ways to fill it up again, because you will run out of gas eventually. It's a long process. So the part 2 of self-awareness is about your values. What matters to you as a person in relationship to your loved one? Might be connection, kindness, safety, patience, dedication, love. A lot of different things come to mind when you work on your values and really enunciate them to yourself. And it can be a really helpful exercise to do one of these different things that we do in our longer trainings with family members and with professionals. So you imagine your 80th birthday celebration with family and friends gathering to speak about your impact on them. And think about your loved one currently struggling with substance use. How would you want them to describe you? How would you want them to reflect back on your presence during this period of their life when they were struggling so much? What qualities would you want them to remember lovingly? These are the values. This is an exercise that helps you ground yourself in what matters most. And that can help you guide how I want to behave, what actions I want to choose in this moment when I think about that sort of retrospectively. Right now, how connected do you feel with that you being honored at your 80th birthday? What would you need to do to start today to become more of that honored person? So we could spend an hour just talking about this as an exercise. I do encourage you to do it yourself and to try it with clients or family members that you might be working with, because it's super helpful to really ground yourself in your own values. And how does that help? Well, it helps you really understand and be in touch with the painful parts and the positive parts, that you can take care of yourself and stay connected to what matters most. So this awareness can help you be proactive and strategic about how you might be responding to your own stress and be responding to your loved one. This reactivity can feel very disempowered, whereas being proactive and intentional can really instill a sense of control and sense of calm and ease, as opposed to feeling like battered about by the winds of the stress of your situation. So there's a concept in acceptance and commitment therapy called willingness. And we do an exercise with clients and in our larger training, in which we really take these two circles and encourage people to fill them out with what matters most to you about your relationship with your loved one in one circle, and what are your uncomfortable or painful thoughts and feelings during this struggle. So what matters and what's hard about it. And people typically fill out things like this. Well, what matters is being connected, being loving, respectful, collaborative. What's hard about it is that I'm afraid, it's heartbreaking, I feel angry, confused, hopeless, etc. And then we encourage people to think about the fact that maybe this is more like a coin rather than two circles, and that what matters is connected to the pain and difficulty. You can't have one without the other. Why do we feel scared and pained about our loved one and scared for them? Well, because we do care about them. If we didn't care about them, we would no longer be worried. It's the care that comes with the pain. So the risk of pain is always there when you care about someone. And so acknowledging that these two things come together is this concept of willingness. Am I willing to acknowledge that, yes, there's pain that comes along with this? And it sometimes makes it easier to bear the discomfort and the pain if you acknowledge that your loved one matters to you and the relationship matters. And therefore, the choice is yours to make, to stay connected because it matters. And there might be pain, and this will continue, but remaining open and flexible, bending, not breaking, in other words, can really help you to sort of weather the change and the stress process. So willingness is choosing to accept what's happening is in fact happening, inviting it in, instead of saying, this isn't happening. I can't believe it. This isn't my life. How does this, I can't believe it. That kind of emotional reaction, which tenses your whole body against the reality. Instead, inviting it in, recognizing that it's true. And this choice then allows you a chance to keep working towards what you really care about. So self-compassion, super important to recognize the ways in which you're a part of this relationship. It acknowledges the stress and pain and allows you to more effectively deal with that stress. There's Kristin Neff is a researcher you probably know that talks about different areas of self-compassion. She has a lot more information that you can check out as if you're interested, but these 3 P's of being patient, being part of a larger human community, being present, those are parts or different ways of thinking about self-compassion that can be terribly helpful in refilling that tank. How does it help? As I said, it really helps you to share this process with your loved one and have that internal voice of kindness that allows you to be human along this process and notice and stay in the present instead of being stuck in the past that you might be upset about or in the future fears. Okay, so we're to the last section here, which is action, behavior, and communication. Helping with communication is really about choosing what impact you want to have. Sometimes you want to crash that glass to clean it. Sometimes we want to use drops of water. The hammer is effective and it's a strong tool, but you have to be judicious about using it, and sometimes it can have a lot of negative consequences down the road. So when we think about communication, as Kristen said at the beginning about how much words matter, it really is a powerful tool. Communication can turn down the heat, encourage positive behaviors. As we talked about before, it can really shift ambivalence. And negative communication often can close doors of collaboration. So seeing those red and green lights in your loved one is a great start. That requires awareness and attention to the input you're getting from your loved one. It's about listening, not just hearing. And it changes to focus on these strategies of communication, changes the interactions in the home and reduces conflict, which can be a great stress reliever for lots of people, not just you and your loved one. Increases the chance that your suggestions might be heard rather than ignored and argued about, and increases the likelihood of being validated and receiving empathy, which is a positive cycle that becomes self-sustaining. When you do that, other people do that around you, and you're more likely to hear each other and have constructive conversations. So there's a lot of different communication tools we can talk about. There's OARS skills from motivational interviewing, which are asking open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summarizing. There's information sandwich, something called SURF. But in general, just know that there's a lot of different strategies. We could talk again for an hour just about that. There's a lot of materials to look at for that. When we talk about responsiveness and how do we respond differently, behavior, this is the main idea about positive reinforcement. Behavior is repeated if it's reinforced, and it is not repeated if it's not reinforced. Obviously, there are nuances to this, but that's the general sort of backdrop. And what we want to be thoughtful about is with positive reinforcement is really noticing those small growths of change, those new behaviors that are hard to take when you're trying to increase positive, healthy behaviors. It's hard to make new changes. So we want to notice them and protect them. We want to grow them, give them fertilizer, water, sunshine, protect them from the winds, like all the things that you would do with a small growth of plant. And then we want to get rid of those weeds as much as we can. And the way we do that is through allowing natural consequences, setting limits that are logical and coherent with the behaviors, and stepping away. A lot of different things to be said about this, but the main thing about positive reinforcement to remember is it is not the same as enabling. It's not just being nice. It's about noticing behavior you like and rewarding it. It's not rewarding the negative behavior. It is rewarding the positive behavior. You want to increase the likelihood that that behavior is going to happen again, or even increase. This is the central idea in most of psychology, I would argue. So reinforcement helps strengthen this idea of positive opposite that I mentioned before. New behaviors competing with the rewards of substance use in a healthier way. Reinforcement helps develop a sense that the world can be rewarding without substances, maybe even more so. This is an idea that people forget. They don't actually believe when they're stuck in a rut of substance use. So this is the reinforcement that helps encourage that sense. Again, different from enabling, which is when a family member does something that may inadvertently lead to an increase in drinking and drug use. Positive reinforcement instead is helping family members do things that increase non-drinking and non-drug using behaviors. So how do we think about this with some insider tips? Be clear to yourself and communicate to your loved one what is the behavior you're trying to increase and how are you going to reward it? Whether it's a smile or a communication or something like actually like a gift, helping actions work best when provided after the behavior, not before. You're not going to give them something first with the promise of it happening later. We've all made that mistake. You only make it once, then you don't do it again. So that's helpful to remember. They're most effective when rewards are most effective when they're consistent, timely, matched appropriately to their level of behavior, not over or undermatched. You want to think about their age. You want to not give a big reward for something small. You have to think of the long run, right? And reinforcers are in the eye of the beholder. As much as I like something, it may not mean that my husband or my kids like that thing. So I have to think about what is rewarding to them. And it needs to be doable for you. If it's a consequence or onerous for you, then that is not what we're looking for. We are looking for something that's positive for them, but really doable for you. Catching them being good is an idea that we have heard of in a lot of parenting strategies. But the other piece is, what are we going to do with these negative behaviors? And these are all of the combination of strategies we can use around negative behaviors. So behaviors, all right, I'm going to go back for just 1 second around these red things. So there's a lot more to be said about this. I honestly feel like our society does a pretty good job of talking about consequences and not such a great job of all the other things we've talked about. So it does feel like I'm giving a little short thrift to this section. But that's the reason why, is because I think that it gets covered more. Allowing natural consequences, setting limits, and stepping away are an important part of this process. Don't get me wrong. It's mostly the most effective when you can combine it with these other strategies. So a lot more resources to look at for those setting limits. Behaviors that do not get reinforced occur less often. That's just a fact. Setting limits helps your loved one understand his behavior as a choice. So it's about his behavior, not him as a person, and the link between the behavior and the consequences. So there's a lot behind that sentence. I encourage you to think about it more because it really is impactful when somebody really understands that they're making a choice around their behavior, that it is going to result in a reward or a consequence. I don't mean to be that sort of black and white about it, but that is sort of the decision-making moment that you want to encourage in your loved one. And setting limits is not just about being tough. It's one piece of a larger, bigger picture that includes staying connected, reinforcing the positive behaviors, and communicating clear consequences. Reinforcing the behaviors you want to strengthen and allowing natural consequences and limit setting for the behaviors you want to reduce is a really powerful combination. So practice is what I started talking about in the middle of the circle. It really is essential because change only comes by addition, not subtraction. You really need to add things in. It always feels awkward. Most of us feel awkward in learning new things, and practicing over time with compassion for yourself is really key. So stumbling is part of the process. That requires you be kind and gentle and have empathy for yourself as well as for your loved one. And trying to learn from your mistakes is a basic kind of CBT strategy that is really important to keep in this whole picture. Tracking your efforts allows you to learn from your mistakes. And remember that behavior change with behavior changes. Okay, so I think we've gone through everything now, and I do want to encourage people to give us feedback about this. It's just an hour. I could talk for so much longer about all these things, and I feel like you probably have a lot of questions and feel like we just ran through that. This is kind of like a taster. It is super helpful for us if you're able to complete this form. Kristen, I think, is going to drop that in the chat. The thing about giving us feedback that's really helpful is, we are a nonprofit. If we get your feedback, then we are able to tell people who might give us money, or when we write grants, that, people had this feeling or this reaction. Even just the percentage of people that fill out these things is meaningful. So really want to encourage you to fill that out, please, please. Okay, so Beyond Addiction is a book that my colleagues and I wrote a while back now, almost 10 years ago. This book, though, just came out. My colleagues, it's like a workbook for Beyond Addiction, super helpful strategies, and lots of social media ways to stay connected, learn about new trainings through our website at the Foundation for Change. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to do that. Okay, so do we have time? 1 minute for any questions or comments? Kristen, what do you think?
If anyone has a quick 1 minute question, we can take it. If not, I did put the link in for that survey, and we also have a quick survey for the PTDC. So there's 2 links in there, and I will also email those. They're both, at least I know our PTDC survey is very quick. It should only take a minute or 2. So really appreciate your time. Jamie did ask, is the family workbook something that they can do unguided? Or
yes. Yeah, so Beyond Addiction is a book written for family members, and the workbook is really based out of those ideas, but more specific strategies, and you can do that self-guided, yes.
Great. And I know there's a ton of resources on the website as well. So I will also, in my follow-up email, I'll send that link out to the website too. So if folks want to poke around and find some of the other tools and videos and resources that you have up there, you'll get that link, or you can Google Invitation to Change. Great. Well, thank you so much. I know we're at 12 o'clock now, and folks probably have other meetings to get to. So you can keep an eye out for a follow-up email from me in your inbox sometime this afternoon. And then I will also be sending out certificates for folks from today. So those will probably come later in the week. But everyone will be getting those as well. So thank you so much, Dr. Kristanke. This was fantastic, and hopefully we'll maybe be able to have you back sometime for
Sounds great.
Additional.
Thank you. Nice
Thanks, everyone.
to see everybody. Happy to be here. Thanks. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.